Hey everyone, you are listening to the Divergent Conversations podcast. We are two neurodivergent mental health professionals in a neurotypical world. I'm Patrick Casale.
And I'm Dr. Neff.
And during these episodes, we do talk about sensitive subjects, mental health, and there are some conversations that can certainly feel a bit overwhelming. So we do just want to use that disclosure and disclaimer before jumping in. And thanks for listening.
Welcome, everyone, back to the series that almost wasn't because of my emotional avoidance. We're hopping back into the OCD series, and I'm so excited for our guest today. We've got Dr. Stacy. I should have asked before. Greeter. Okay.
Yep.
I was actually, wow, I almost pronounced it right. Dr. Stacy Greeter, who's a autistic, OCD, ADHD psychiatrist. And Patrick has the official bio if he is done joking.
Wow, what a good
Or we
time
can
to
let
start.
Stacy introduce herself.
So, I feel like I need to redeem myself.
Okay, you can redeem yourself by reading the bio.
Dr. Stacy Greeter is an autistic, ADHD, and OCD child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist in Sarasota, Florida. Nope, not gonna happen.
I'll take over now. That's cool.
Okay, tell us about yourself,
Okay.
Stacy.
Okay. I'm so excited to be here. Loving this podcast. Big fan. So my autistic special interest is everything psychiatry. And
well, that's convenient for you.
it's so nice, right? And profitable in a capitalist society, which is also a form of privilege. And my other autistic special interests are fantasy creatures, especially the fluffy ones. So I make these elaborate story-based fantasy themed, like Star Wars themed, Little Mermaid themed is coming up this weekend, presentations to explain complex psychiatric concepts.
Oh
and
my
make that
goodness.
relatable.
That's amazing.
So the one I was telling you about where I copied your idea of the Venn diagrams is a dragon differential diagnosis presentation, and that one is all dragon themed.
This sounds amazing for kids and adolescents and adults.
And adults like me.
Because we get to be playful too.
Yes. And I think in a way, the humor and the story can make things resonate, so you can talk about intersectional marginalization or talk about internalized ableism, but it's in a story with a character. So you can digest the material more is my goal anyway.
That is so beautiful. I am going to go find your resources for this because that sounds incredible. Oh my goodness. And so I'm so curious what you're doing with the Little Mermaid because I wanted to be the Little Mermaid growing up. Like she was a special interest. And I now understand why I very much wanted to just live in water where it was quiet and sensory soothing.
Okay. Yeah.
But what is your Little Mermaid theme that you're playing?
Okay. I'm gonna try to find a photo for you too while I'm looking this too, because I was playing around this weekend. Okay, so it's called Still Not Quite Part of Your World. And it's about and why like that classic sense of how Ariel thought, I don't belong underwater, so it's because I need to be on land. But then I realized I don't belong on land either, and it's because I'm autistic and ADHD. And she realizes this after the diagnosis of her daughter, Melody, and Prince Eric is going through stuff, trying to make peace with is this a label that's going to be harmful for our child? What do we do? How do we process that? And then he sings a musical number about wanting to understand her autistic world better, which is sung by child psychiatrist 𝗿𝗶𝘀liche, because I cannot sing. And then we have Ursula, who is continuously dropping the ableist comments throughout the presentation. And Flounder is adorable. We have a lot of fun. I'm very blessed.
Oh my goodness. And is this something you put on YouTube or where is this?
Yeah.
Is this okay?
Yeah.
Cool.
So we're doing it live first at DragonCon, and then later we're going to do a recorded version online. Yeah.
Okay. This sounds so incredible. And I
have a lot of fun. All right, here's the picture. Now you can see. Okay. There you go. You see that?
Yes, that's
It's
amazing.
amazing, my little one. That's my backyard,
Amazing.
actually. Because
Oh my goodness.
so I'm super excited. I'm hoping psychoeducational fan fiction can grow into a thing.
Yeah, no, I have a friend who does like superhero therapy that's neurodivergent.
Yeah.
Neurodivergent friendly. I think that intersection of like fan um and neurodivergence and therapy, because you're right, it makes it so much more playful, so much more accessible.
Yeah. So I think it gives me an opportunity for Ariel and Eric to talk about their regrets as a parent when they were trying to get Melody, their daughter, to suppress her stimming. But, it's lovable characters, you know what I'm saying? So then we can kind of like talk about grieving, regret, things like that in a more, I think, manageable way.
Yeah.
I hope.
See, this is what my brain's not good at. My brain can be like, here's the science of it. But like turning it into story, turning it into narrative, turning it into a world. I love brains that can do that. And I'm a little bit jealous of your brain right now.
Oh, I'm jealous of your brain. Your resources are amazing. Amazing.
Well, and it sounds like you are able to take some of them and then like turn them playful and fun, which I'm so excited to see.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Well,
I'm done dying now, which is great.
I'm glad you're alive,
Really?
Patrick.
welcome back.
That would have been what a wonderful way to start. Like, what if I had just fallen off the chair?
So were you choking or was this like a throat because of
I
your
was
throat
choking,
issues?
Yeah, I had swallowed something.
You aspirated your spit or something.
Yeah, that was fun. So I watched your video that you sent me that was all about like the Lord of the Rings and OCD.
Okay.
And
Okay.
how you birthed
With
that
Smaug.
tone. Yeah, that was really amazing. Like, as a huge Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, Tolkien fan, that is right up my alley in terms of how to learn about something. Because for me, I don't do well when I'm reading like scholastic text or research-based text. I kind of immediately glaze over and can't process the information. So that was super helpful. And it was really just cool to watch that from that perspective. So thank you for sharing that
Thanks,
resource. with me too.
Patrick. I have one. It was a different one where Smaug, and my husband does the voices for me. Thank God he does. God bless him. Shout out to that. Where Smaug talks about the difference it made in his life when he switched from a non-affirming therapist to a neurodiversity affirming therapist. So at first, his special interest in collecting, cataloging, and researching elven artifacts was treated like OCD symptom that needs to be suppressed, and he felt shame and an internalized sense of brokenness. And then Smeagol helps him get a neurodiversity affirming therapist who recognizes that is part of what he needs for his sensory system because it's a special interest. Yeah.
Okay, so that's so interesting. I feel like we're gonna get to all the things we want to talk about, but probably in a very divergent way. So I kind of want to dig a well there.
Classically.
Yes. Yeah, it's very classic. Of like special interest being treated like an OCD thing. Is that something that you see happen in psychiatry and mental health? Okay.
Yes. Yes.
So do you have, I'm so curious if you think are there, so special interests, how are those conceptualized as obsessions?
Right.
Is it what? Yeah. What have you seen?
So for example, let's say there's a kid and he's organizing his Pokemon cards. Okay. Now it could be so on the surface, the same behavior can be many different things, right? So you have to dig at what the person's experience of that behavior is. So a kid organizing Pokemon cards could be no matter what, it just doesn't feel right. And if I don't get it just right, I'm going to feel wrong forever. So I can't stop. I wish I could stop and just leave him alone, but I got to keep doing it. What if something bad happens? If that card is next to that card, or maybe even there's some anthropomorphization of the Pokemon characters, they're next to each other and they might not like each other, and then all kinds of bad things will happen. So in that example of OCD, the narrative is I can't stop. There's a control that this has over me, and I don't like it. And it's fear driven. What if blank happens if I stop?
It's unpleasant.
Yeah,
I feel like that, like it's unpleasant versus like organizing for a special interest. It's pleasant, it's joyful.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that
Yes.
piece is so huge. I love that. Okay.
Right. Where it's so digging down into special interest, what would it be like if you were forced to stop? Well, that would be sad. That'd be terrible. I might miss it. And then in addition, like tics, especially more complex tics, can get confused and be hard to piece apart. And then generally with the tic, there's like an urge, like a physical urge, to do the thing that builds over time. And
I know you're talking about like Tourette's syndrome.
yeah, like Tourette's.
Okay.
Tourette's.
Yeah.
So with the OCD, the urge, which is based on the urge to do the behavior is based on fear, and it dissipates the longer you resist it.
Right.
With the tic, it's more of a sensory physical urge that will build the longer they resist the behavior. Yeah. So I'm really into that detailed differential diagnosis that we don't cause harm to people.
Absolutely. Because when we pathologize the things that bring us joy and the things that soothe us, like that is so harmful. Absolutely. And given how often OCD and autism overlap, it makes sense that this sort of confusion would happen all the time, especially if one's diagnosed but the other isn't. Yeah, absolutely.
So like a kid can start with a special interest in Pokemon, and then because of their OCD, then they develop an OCD behavior surrounding their Pokemon cards.
So this, I haven't had language for it, but like complex OCD, I'm trying to find language for it because in the classic OCD text, it's like ego dystonic, right? So it's typically things like when I get intrusive images, they're things that are very not value aligned. But I saw this in one of my children who's vegan, and that's very like it comes from her hypersensitivity, her hyperempathy, but then developed OCD around it. So there was actually an ego syntonic nature to it, but then the contamination OCD that grew out of it. So her and I came up with so many metaphors of like, it was like a two-headed, what was the metaphor we used? We actually used a lot of playful imagery. It was like a two-headed beast, and one head was a snake, but they had to eat from the same buffet, and one was like values aligned. But that's why it was so hard to treat the OCD.
Interesting.
Because they had to eat from the same source. But that sort of OCD where it intersects either with a value because you're autistic and like very value aligned, or it intersects with a special interest, that's a whole different beast because they're intertangled. Have you like seen that in autistic OCD folks you work with? That kind of more messy OCD presentation?
Yes, it's often messy. It's often like the same behavior can have multiple layers to it.
Yeah.
You know?
How do you, I don't, and I'm maybe jumping ahead. I don't even know if you do exposure or you're, I don't even know how much therapy you do, but like, are there things you do when it's like, this is a special interest and we want to protect it, but then we also want to address the OCD?
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. So I do some psychotherapy. I'm more into internal family systems therapy and ACT.
I like both of those. Yeah.
Then exposure and response prevention. Usually I'm referring out to a different therapist for that because it's not as much my thing.
Understandable.
But so the question is, I'm trying to understand the question. The question is, how can you give me another question?
So when the OCD is focused around like a special interest, it's also a good thing. So like versus an OCD where it's purely ego dystonic, it's purely experienced as like different from self, but it's like there's part of it that is soothing, there's part of it that's consistent with self, and then there's part of it that has become either obsessive or contaminated. Are there ways you've found to work with that?
Asking people to imagine So what if OCD wasn't driving this and it was just your values? What would you be doing? Okay. So,
That's a
someone,
great question.
right.
Yeah.
So someone who really draws a lot of fulfillment and comfort from their Catholic Christian beliefs. But now they're on the rosary and they're doing it over and over again, and it has to be a certain way. And they're developing religious scrupulosity. So now something that they really value and have a lot of fulfillment from, that is part of their spiritual being, unfortunately, has been contaminated by OCD. And so now we're piecing apart what is values driven and what is compulsive and fear driven. It's
I love
complex.
that. It is so complex, especially when you throw in our kind of all or nothing thinking. Like, I know for me as a child, I've gotten a bit better with this as an adult, but I still struggle with it. Once I have a bad experience with something, it's like the whole thing becomes contaminated and bad. So I think it could really easily become, once like something that's a source of comfort becomes contaminated by OCD, the temptation might be just to throw the whole thing out versus to reclaim, this is the part that's value aligned. So I love how you help folks tease that out, because that's so important to be able to reclaim that and not let OCD take it away.
Yeah. And OCD preys on stuff that's really important to us.
Yeah.
Yeah. I went through
Yeah.
a time when it was in residency, and I went through an OCD of, well, what if I am not asking my patient if they're suicidal in just the right way that would encourage them to tell me the truth about that? And yeah, right. And so I was working on that, trying to not repeatedly ask them in different ways
Yeah.
to try to gain some surety.
Oh my gosh. Wow. That would be an interesting, I would love to read more about that. Therapists with OCD.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of risky things we work
Yes.
with. And so of
Yes.
course that's going to be a
Right.
breeding ground for OCD. And so how therapists learn to work with that, like that's such a poignant example of wanting to do risk assessments correctly. And
Mhm.
wow. Okay. I'm having kind of a mind moment of just like that. Yeah. Yeah. It can really impact how we show up.
Mhm. Right. And so yes, I have a couple good therapists actually, I see. So this is good, right? So I feel like what's interesting is because you have OCD, and when you go through OCD treatment, you reach this kind of above where you would be if you didn't have OCD. I'm going to try to explain that better. Okay, so like because I really like kind of dove down into this, I'm very mindful of how I ask, my emotional affect when I ask, how neutral I am about asking. It's like I really had to work on it because of the OCD.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a sense, I think I'm tracking, but like in a sense of,
Yes.
is it partly because OCD brings more emotion up for you that you had to work on
Mhm.
how you ask those questions?
I guess. And I think that the treatment of OCD forces one to really intentionally think about what they value and like live in line with that in these spaces.
Mhm.
Does that make sense? In a way that I don't know if I would had, like I otherwise I wouldn't have given that much thought to how I
Yeah.
do my safety assessment.
Yeah. I think that makes sense, but can you unpack it a little?
A
of
little bit
how
more.
it- Yeah. Like how OCD causes you to give more thought. Is that how you said it?
Yeah, I think because you have to figure out what is the OCD
Mm.
and what is your values-based response.
Yes. I feel
And
like
you have to separate
Yes.
those.
Yes.
And so in order to separate those, you're going to really want to figure like, well, what is my most valued, most effective way of doing a safety assessment do it that
Yes.
way, and not the way my OCD tells me to do, which is ask someone 3 or 4 times in different ways with like a clear affect that you don't want them to say yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're not allowed to say yes to this question. Yeah. Okay. I feel like you've just described like the hypervigilance that is my life. I think I do
Really?
that with throughout my life
Okay.
it's one of the things that has made me, I'm realizing like really feel like I'm struggling with burnout with owning my business is I like catching errors or going back and redoing material. Like so much of that I think is obsessive and OCD driven, and it's freaking burning me out. And so, but I'm always doing that. Like, is this me being obsessive or is this
Mhm.
values aligned? And then same thing with my parenting. Like, I think when you live with OCD, you're constantly, well, yeah, you're constantly doubting your mind. And it's like the doubting disease, but teasing out, is this, and partly because we only live with our minds. And I don't know about you, but I'm guessing since you're also ADHD, you've probably had OCD since childhood. So it's like
Yeah.
we've only lived with this mind. So getting at like, what is a reference point? I'm always this since I was little, I've been like, I just wish I could experience someone else's mind.
know.
And I think it's that question of, is this a decent reference point to be using, or is this an OCD or an obsessive
Right.
reference point?
And we never have a
yeah.
clear answer to that, no matter what, ever.
And that probably drives burnout. And I'm just now making that connection.
It's
'Cause
not.
we're probably always
That's an unanswerable question, right? That's the fantasy of the neurotypical me, and like they just know naturally how to be the perfect psychiatrist, right?
the fantasies and neurotypical me. Yeah. 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 Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I hear you. I hear you. These are unanswerable questions. We have to make lots and lots and lots of peace with ambiguity.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's very true.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like constantly trying to parse it apart and put it in different buckets from time to time to think like, is this what's driving the ship, or is this what's driving the ship, or are they both co-driving at the same time and collaborating? It can be very confusing and overwhelming, and trying to like use someone else's mind as a reference point would be a nice fantasy for sure. I think about that a lot of like, is this what everyone else experiences, or is this how everyone else thinks about this? Which, yeah, that's like you said, Stacy, unanswerable in so many ways.
I
Stacey,
still try to get my therapist to do it for me, though. Anyway,
I used to do that with my therapist. And at one point, he was like, I kind of feel like you're treating me like a neurotypical, like, how did he say it? Like this neurotypical reference. I mean, he didn't use the language of reference point, but I was like, oh, yeah, I guess I am. I ask my spouse a lot because he doesn't have autism or ADHD or OCD. So he's my reference point. But yes, all of it's a fantasy.
I hear you. It's and not to minimize that I love and hate being autistic and ADHD. And I do think there are many ways in which medicine self-selects for autistic traits, and that psychiatry feels like being a fish that finally gets to swim in water with the kind of candid, authentic, direct, deeper conversations we get to have.
Medicine self-selects for autistic traits, meaning a lot of
Yes.
autistic people end up in the medical field.
Yes.
So that is something I've had people ask about that. I see that, but it's also like one of the fields where it's the least, it's the one of the, it's so uncomfortable to be publicly autistic.
Yeah, so that's something I'm working on too. I'm doing a presentation at Stanford on supporting autistic doctors, especially during medical training
Oh
and
my
residency and fellowship. You know,
gosh, that's amazing.
in part, our usual autistic thing of like advocating to try to heal from our own trauma, and also because I just and that's the biggest reason I'm so openly autistic, because it's so hard to be openly autistic, in the medical world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know quite a few who are in the medical world, but are not out because it would be too detrimental. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm like, anytime I can make it just a tiny bit safer
Yeah.
for someone
Absolutely.
else, just a touch.
Yeah.
Um, it was kind of fascinating. My favorite part of discovering I was autistic was being able to tell my patients and just seeing that glow of connection and excitement and some hope. And that's really exciting. But it has been really mixed and challenging coming out to physician colleagues.
Yes. Yeah. I would assume so. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. The patients feel so lucky to have you, and the colleagues. Yeah.
So do you, Stacy, want to go down that pathway of talking about, you had kind of floated the idea of navigating the psychiatric and medical system, and how to be more supportive for
I'm cool with that. I'm cool with
that.
also sticking with OCD. I thought that was our topic originally, by the way, Anna. It was a different topic.
Yeah, I'm glad I messaged you to say like, hey, how do you feel about A, B, and C? And you're like, oh shit, that's not what I thought we were talking about.
I was like, I made a Word document, but that's okay.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No worries.
I actually
like
now that you're
talking about
saying this-
OCD.
Okay, cool. I actually now I'm having like a memory of like, yeah, because I think you reached out a long time ago before we had this series set up.
Yeah.
About navigating. Yeah. I mean, I do think that'd be helpful, especially it sounds like you've prepped for it, because I do know a lot of,
If
I mean,
that's
we've talked
possible.
a lot about navigating medical systems and how hard that is. And we have a global audience, so I know
It is so hard.
Yeah.
And so here I am. I mean, I also feel like I straddle multiple worlds because I'm a doctor, I'm a patient, I'm autistic. And so I have definitely experienced a lot of invalidation and dismissal at the hands of medical professionals. And I also say that, with a lot of compassion for other medical professionals
Yeah.
who are very burnt out. And on top of that, the medical profession through training, like people are either kicked out of med school or shamed if they don't know the answer or they can't get it right. And that really sets people up where then they have a patient with chronic pain, a thing they don't understand. And instead of, oh yeah, I don't understand this, and that's okay. It's like, nope, you're wrong. You can't have this thing as a defense. Does that make sense?
It does make
Little
sense.
bit?
I mean, so like you're
Yeah.
kind of trained into a binary of like, it's your fault or the
Right.
patient doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That I think what I think is that medical training does not set us up to be able to be vulnerable, to be able to embrace being wrong. And that unfortunately is a detriment, especially when you're working with an autistic patient who has all the things and is, yes, me too. Okay, it's like, for example, I go to the neurologist and he does the nerve conduction study, and I'm having severe neuropathy pain. And after the study, he's says, "You're fine. You're great. You don't need to come back. Bye." Right? And it's like, no, the nerve conduction study might be normal, but clearly I am not fine. I'm not experiencing fine. I think that to be able to sit with and fully accept suffering that we both feel responsible for and yet are helpless to understand or treat is hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is to emphasize that it's really not your fault when your doctor, you have an interaction like that with your doctor. I think as autistic people too, we're used to blaming ourselves when social interactions don't go well.
Absolutely.
That Well, the doctor said that to me because I must have come off weird, or and then there's this whole subculture in itself, medicine, that's very hierarchical.
Yeah.
So I think it's fascinating that autistic doctors get great connections with their patients, but have trouble with their colleagues.
I had that experience when I
Because
worked in
we're
hospital.
less because we're less hierarchical. We're like on your level. Great. That works great with the patient, not with supervisors, etc.
Yep.
Right. So I think that's really hard. They call it the triple empathy problem. So there's autistic versus holistic, and then on top of that is patient versus doctor, and there's separate subcultures.
Right.
So, with my patients, I can joke around and be like, well, that question might offend a neurotypical, but now you've given me an opportunity to info dump about my special interest and do some extra research to learn some more stuff about psychiatry. So thank you so much.
I think you're so right, though. Like, you're talking about the neuropathy / neurologist experience, which rings true because I just had this experience a couple of days ago where, like, I waited so long to get into a neurologist office. It took almost 3 months of advocating. Like, I need to get in. Rejection of referral. Finally get in. Doctor spends possibly 12 minutes tops, stumped the entire time, confused by what I'm presenting.
Right.
And the recommendation is like, well, why don't you go back to the sleep specialist who referred you here? Because it sounds like the issue you're experiencing is impacting your sleep. And I'm like, at that point, as the patient and someone who obviously has a little bit more access to some resource in terms of being able to advocate, you're just kind of like, I give up almost. Like, I think the reality for so many of us is like, I just give up. Like, I just wave the white flag. I'm just going to be destined to live in this kind of like hell that exists for me physiologically a lot of the time. So, like, navigating the psychiatric system as well can be so challenging for our clients, right? If they don't have access to resources, information, maybe they see someone who only gets to spend 10 to 15 minutes per visit. Or the patient ends up feeling like, I'm made to feel like I'm med seeking. I'm made to feel like I'm over exaggerating. I'm like minimizing. I am like creating this narrative that isn't real. And then you end up questioning your own mind. Like, is this really happening to me?
Totally. Lots of invalidation, unfortunately, is happening in the medical profession. And it's also part of neurotypical culture that we just expect people to know what to do or what to say or what it means to be a patient, right? So that's why I made this long document, how to be a patient and interact with neurotypicals. Right. It's like there's really a huge part the patient plays in successful treatment.
Yeah, absolutely. So what kinds of things are on that document?
Okay, so I have my table of like the doctor is expert in diagnosis, but you are expert in your subjective experience. The doctor is expert in the dosage of the medication and how to communicate with them outside of appointments. But the patient is expert in your symptoms and your response to the medicine and whether or not you take the medicine. Because I think that role clarification is really helpful. And then I have a whole section on, honestly, how to mask and deal with people who have big egos to get your needs met, about like when you're walking into the medical appointment. And I hate that. And I've got a lot of flack for that, but I'm like, this could be life or death for people who are seeing a specialist and they have no access to another specialist who takes their insurance, But
masking, like sometimes, like masking is a survival response, and sometimes
and this is about survival, unfortunately. And I say so walk into the appointment not wanting to be right, but just getting your needs met.
That's such good advice because
And
doctors
then vent to a
that
safe person
yeah,
right afterwards.
yeah, because that invokes
Yes.
that can invoke defense and then
Yeah.
like in the doctor or
Yeah.
and it can also cause a person to be misperceived when they're coming in and I think for a lot of us autistic people, it is like, I want you to see the facts because then I know
Mhm.
we'll have the same idea, but it comes across as like, I need to be right. Um, because it's like, I need you to see these facts that I see. And so that's such a helpful reframe. I really,
Yeah. And not to be like, some doctors are gonna love that.
yeah.
Some
Many
are.
won't, though.
Many won't, unfortunately, but to be able to be prepared to let go, that it's not your job to correct or convince your
Mhm.
doctor of something. It is your job to get your healthcare needs met, whatever that looks like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good advice because I think it's so easy to like, especially as autistic people, we've probably done a decent amount of research, right, on like our symptoms or our experiences and come in with ready to present
Yeah.
it all. And the doctor can kind of take offense to that as if like, well, you didn't go to medical school, so I'm not going to listen to this, or we don't have time to talk about this, or this is being blown out of proportion. And as you
Right.
said, a lot of invalidation, unfortunately, which is just such a common experience.
Yeah. I also think, and if the doctor's willing to do this, so I'll write up questions for my patients to answer ahead of time because with people being on the spot, trying to process everything, it's just terrible. It's
Yeah.
terrible.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'll be like, you kind of know what questions you want to ask your patient, or at least the gist of them, to be able to have them do that while they're calm, collected, and regulated. Yes. Plus, I think taking notes is super helpful and asking if you can bring an ally with you
Yeah.
to the appointment to help you
Absolutely.
process everything.
Mhm.
And then scheduling more frequent appointments since you can't cover everything at each appointment.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really good advice. I like that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I want to touch on something, and I want
Okay.
to diverge back to OCD because
All right,
you
we're
had
divergent again.
Yeah. Let's take this car down a different exit. You had mentioned when you messaged me like the differentiation between stimming and OCD repetitive behavior.
I have a chart. I'm going to pull up my chart. So Patrick was asking me about stimming, tics, and OCD compulsions. And I like things in nice visuals and different colors. So
I do too. You're speaking the love language.
Nice. So stimming is self-soothing, whereas tics are annoying. And the compulsions, and all of these can look the same on the surface. Compulsions associated with OCD, fear-driven. Also, stimming is present from like tiny toddlerhood, generally, and like tics are coming out around age 7. Usually, OCD compulsions average age 10, and then we're gonna ask the person what would it be like if they were forced to stop stimming. That would be more distress inside. Whereas tics, they're like, yeah, I wish I could stop that. It kind of annoys me. And the urge builds the longer they resist it. Compulsions, the fear, like, oh my gosh, I need to wash my hands because they're dirty. I'm going to get sick. The longer they go and resist acting on the OCD fear and doing the compulsion, it dissipates over time. So those are some main differences. I have a chart on treatment differences too, which is why it's so important to distinguish them, right? Because so stimming, collaborate with the individual to help them do what regulates their body, but find alternatives to stims that cause harm. And they can decide when they want or need to mask and suppress, and when they can be authentically unmasked and safe to do so. And we don't treat them with medicine. Right. Whereas the tics and OCD compulsions, of course, we're treating them in their various ways. And then medications are different. Yeah. I might show you while I'm here one of my dragon egg Venn diagrams.
Ooh, I'd love to see
Please
that.
do.
Right. Oh, this might be an old one presentation I pulled up by accident. But
And for those of you listening, if you want to watch and see these graphics, these are in our
yeah,
YouTube channel. So make sure you tune into that as well.
I have them on my website where you can download every single slide too under the psychiatry bootcamp section.
That's
Cool.
so cool.
Too.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, like, the document you talked about for like the guide
Yeah.
for navigate.
It's called How to Win at Being a Psychiatric Patient.
Is that available? Like people could go download it, or is that?
I can make it available.
Oh, you don't have to. I was just curious.
I mean, I can
It's-
send it to you. I don't know. I guess I could put it on my website, maybe.
I mean, if
Yeah.
you're comfortable, that's a you decision. If you're comfortable with it, I
Right.
think that'd be a resource a lot of people would benefit from. But
Yeah. If you send it to us and you feel comfortable with it
Sure.
being out in the world, we can link it to the show notes too.
or we could put it, or we can link to your website.
That would be cool. Yes. Yeah.
hmm
Um.
I like how you're adding in Tourette's so much, because you're right. Like Tourette's can look both like OCD and autism and ADHD. So I like how you're also adding in Tourette's and tics
Yeah.
into the
I'll
conversation.
show you my Tourette's versus OCD dragon eggs now that I have them up. Okay. Sorry.
Okay.
There's so many versions of stuff on my computer. It's kind of scary.
My computer's very ADHD, and I
Oh.
realize that's a big part of my stress.
Yeah. So I got
Mine
this.
is very autism driven and it's so clean. And I have one icon and nothing else will ever live on there.
I'm so jealous.
I'm jealous. I can never find anything because I delete it all.
Oh gosh.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's
So these are the things I made that I got based on
I love the egg. Amazing.
Mhm. I have fun. Definitely. Cool.
I like that visual. I think that helps for people who need to see it visually to process it and also just to have fun with it. We've talked about fun on previous episodes and like how playfulness is so important with a lot of the stuff that we talk about. And it sounds like you really do try to incorporate playfulness and fun and joy into your practice and into your business and into your life. And I'm sure that has a trickle down effect to the patients that you support and serve as well.
I hope so. I think it's interesting that you mentioned playfulness because it brings up what we were talking about earlier. Because I feel like in medical training, maybe professionalism was like the antithesis of that almost, sadly. I don't know how you, Megan, and Patrick experienced it, professionalism, right? And then, so I think I've definitely found that the more I can move into a freer, vulnerable, more playful, authentically autistic self, the better psychiatrist I am.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes so much sense. Yeah. Professionalism. I really tried to be. That was a big part of my mask, but
Yeah.
it never came naturally to me. And when I shifted to just seeing neurodivergent clients, a much more playful therapist emerged, and it felt so much more congruent with me. And one thing I talk about a lot, I use this concept, I call it play shame, but I think a lot of neurodivergent children
I haven't heard
experience
that.
a lot of, yeah, I mean, it's just a Meg and Anna brain
Okay.
combo. Like, I think a lot of us as children experience a lot of shame around how we played because it wasn't right or it was too much. And so I think for a lot of us, we've perhaps thwarted it. And so I think for me, getting reconnected with playful parts of me has been such a big part of unmasking, because those were the parts that were so repressed. A lot of them are very ADHD parts. And so they were the parts that I had a lot of shame around. I thought these were immature parts. So for me, reclaiming play has been such a big part of my neurodivergent identity.
Yeah. And then that gives
discovery.
your patients permission to play and be authentic and vulnerable and connect with those parts too.
Yeah. I noticed that. I noticed a lot of neurodivergent therapists and medical providers, there's a playfulness to a lot of how they show up in the world, whether it's how they dress, whether it's making dinosaur egg Venn diagrams. Like there's a There's a
Yes,
playfulness.
I have serotonin molecules on my dress.
Gosh, that's amazing.
I think
Yeah.
so much of that unmasking experience when we are quote unquote trying to figure out what's professional for our field is embracing that authenticity and that personality and really showcasing it, because it also mirrors for your clients, for your patients, for the people you support, to give them some permission to do the same. And that's why I like what you said before about like being more open in the medical field, because so many people aren't able to be. So it really does help model that for people that this can be a possibility, in some contexts and situations. So I think the more we align with who we are, the more it shows up in the work that we do, regardless of the work that we do.
Yeah. And I think it's a process for me, because when the voice will come in from residency, like, no, you shouldn't do it that way. That's not the right way, the professional way. And I just get better and better at putting it to the side.
Yeah. Good. I mean, I think that's huge. I've always kind of had a like buck the system mentality, or even in grad school, whenever we were being told this is how you show up as a therapist, or this is how a therapist presents or dresses, I was always just kind of like, that's not going to work for me, so I'm not going to do that. I also have the privilege to say that more often than a lot of people, so
Right.
those go hand in hand, but it just never was going to be a fit. Like, that's the group practice culture I've cultivated, is like, I don't care what you dress like. I don't care what you look like. Like, I don't care that you just dyed your hair hot pink. None of that stuff bothers me. Some of the stuff I see in these therapeutic Facebook groups, I'm always just kind of confused about, like, why are you so bent out of shape over some of this stuff? So I think the more we can do this, the more we can model and just represent as well.
Yeah. And then the more energy and presence you have with the patient, because you're not trying to devote so much of your work to be the professional version, right? Like, you could do it, but at a cost.
Yeah.
At a cost, and it would cost your energy and presence with your patient
Yeah.
/ client.
Yeah, exactly. And then it comes down to, for me, like, which energy cost is more important? Like, my over expenditure into presenting and looking and appearing professional, or my over expenditure in terms of like being able to unmask more safely, be more authentic with the people I support, give them better client outcomes. Like, the juice is worth the squeeze for me in terms of like saying that's where my values align, and that feels way more important to me at this stage of my life.
Definitely. But I'm in private practice, a place of privilege. I actually wanted to go into academic medicine because I love teaching so much and be at an academic medical center, but it is emotionally safer for me to be in private practice and then have the privilege to be unmasked and authentic and have a culture of my office where there's open, direct, and vulnerable, egalitarian, non-hierarchical communication. That was a mouthful, sorry.
Well, and I see that all the time. And I think a lot of, especially when folks have the privilege and ability to pivot to private practice, because I see that a lot where medical providers or therapists will say, like, everything's great with my patients, but it's all the system stuff I can't do. Yeah. So it makes sense that you are in private practice. I see that pivot a lot. It makes sense.
Yes. Yeah, I'm grateful. I'm really grateful.
Same. Same.
And I feel like there's some depth and authenticity in the discussions we get to have with our patients that I don't know if I can't imagine in another place. I just love the psychiatry so much, and that way of relating is a very autistically oriented way of relating. And then I get to incorporate my special interest into teaching about psychiatry. So yeah, I'm really, really fortunate.
I love that. And do most of the folks you work with, or most of them autistic, ADHD?
A lot of them are, not everybody. Not everybody. So I'm in a smaller town, community psychiatrist, so I'll take all kinds. That being said, um, us autistic people find each other.
We do.
And since I'm openly autistic, there are a lot of patients looking for an autistic doctor. I started a spreadsheet of people for doctors to put their info down if they were okay with publicly sharing their
That's
neurotype.
amazing.
I can send it to you. And there's also a tab for therapists and a tab for assessment. I think I have maybe 4 people on there so far on the doctor side. So it's not easy to have doctors coming out as autistic.
Yeah.
Yes, but definitely, just for anyone out there listening, that people will really, really, really want to connect with you and your autistic self.
Yeah, absolutely. This comes up a lot of like, we just need autistic directories for everything. Like,
Right.
we need to be able to find the autistic hairstylist, the autistic doctors, the autistic, like, just everything,
Right.
so that we can, because it cuts down the labor so much. Like when we're working with, I mean, I just did a social media post that reviewed the cross neurotype studies, right? Like when we're communicating within our same neurotype, it just cuts through so much of the labor. I'm excited for like 10 years from now where just all these amazing directories exist and are synthesized. I mean, autistic brains, like we should be able to create this, right? Collective effort.
We're working on it. I'll work on it. We
Little
all
by
will.
little. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. I think so much has really grown, especially in the therapy world, to make it safer for therapists to come out as autistic. So I'm really hoping we can do more in the medical professional world.
I hope so too. I think so many, both for the medical providers who are autistic and like burning out, and for the patients looking for those people. Yeah.
Studies show that if you are an autistic doctor and you have worked with another doctor you believe is autistic, your rate of suicide is lower.
Really? I mean, that makes sense, but wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that could be a whole other conversation, is mental health with medical providers, which speaks to the culture that you were describing. Yeah. Yeah. We have diverged.
Yes. And I think it feels like we're at that place. So we've talked for about an hour. It always feels like, oh wow, that was an hour. Jeez Louise. Thank you, Stacy, for coming on and sharing and being vulnerable and just being who you are. And I think what an asset to not only the Florida community that you serve, but anywhere that you can be in contact with patients and be supporting them in their journeys. So can you tell the audience where they can find you? And we'll link that in the show notes as well.
Sure. Thanks so much, Patrick. My website is stacygreetermd.com. So it's STACYGREETERMD.com. And my YouTube channel, where you can enjoy those videos, is @ Stacy Greeter MD, STACYGREETERMD. Thank you so much for having me, Patrick and Megan.
Thanks so much for coming on. I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's felt very alive. It's felt playful at times. I've learned some new things. So thank you so much.
Yeah, really appreciate it. And sorry to drop we're talking about OCD
cool.
1 or 2 days beforehand.
That was cool. I like talking about OCD.
Yeah. No. I think originally and like weave both into the conversation. So thank you for pivoting and diverging.
Sure.
And to everyone listening to Divergent Conversations, new episodes are out on Fridays on all major podcast platforms and YouTube. You can like, download, subscribe, and share. And goodbye.